So the war that has held most of the world hostage for the last several months is finally over, as the two countries, US and Iran, have signed formally a peace agreement, and the president of Iran has helpfully put up a copy of the peace agreement on his social media account. There it is. So we can go point by point and examine everything about this deal, including who has agreed to what, who's given more away, and who has finally won. And we'll find out, of course, what it means for India and the rest of the world. So a full breakdown of everything that is in the deal is in this video. Before we start, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And if you can, sign up for our membership, where we give you a news bulletin every day that is fact-checked, curated, and not at all triggering. We won't make you angry. We won't make you upset. We won't make you feel fatigued when you listen to our news bulletin. That is our offering. Sign up for our membership. Let's take a look at what is in the peace deal between the US and Iran. We'll go point by point. Point number one, the war stops. It's an agreement for an immediate end to military operations in the region, including Lebanon. And this is the important part. It's significant because the war was not always about just Iran. Israel was expanding its military territory into Lebanon. And for Iran, one of the main demands in the negotiation was Lebanon has to be included in that ceasefire, and that's what they have got. So in this point, who's the winner? Clearly Iran, because Iran succeeded in linking Lebanon's security to the final agreement. Tehran had obtained protection not just for itself, but also for its most important regional allies, which is the Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iranian officials have already warned that any future Israeli strikes in Lebanon will be treated as a violation to the agreement itself, which means that point Iran on this one. Point number two, regime change is off the table. And this is this is a big one. The agreement commits that both of the countries will respect each other's sovereignty and not interfere with internal affairs. Now, what does this mean? Remember, when we started off, this sounds like, oh yeah, we're going to respect each other, but it's a lot deeper than that. Earlier this year, remember, Donald Trump openly encouraged Iranian protesters, citizens who were protesting, saying that the American government supports you, protest against your government, this is your moment. And many observers believe that Washington hoped that military pressure would destabilize the Iranian regime. Remember, although America had not confirmed they were looking for regime change, it was obvious that that is what they wanted. So the signed agreement now guarantees the exact opposite. So this point again goes to Iran, because the Islamic Republic's biggest objective was simply survival. They've achieved that. The regime has survived. There's been no change. There's been no transition to any sort of democracy. There's been no collapse of their system. In geopolitical terms, this particular point is a major victory. Point number three, the Strait of Hormuz reopens. Now, this is an important thing for the global economy. Remember, we've been looking at it this entire time. It's caused a flare-up of fuel prices across the world, and it started to have a problem with food prices, food inflation, a lot of other issues for the whole globe. So the conflict now has said very clearly that Iran will open it up without any sort of charges, and to the best of its ability, make sure that the ships are passing through safely. And so this is a big point winner for the world and also for India. For India, because remember, we import 88% of our crude oil. So any increase in oil prices affected us. It affects our rupee. It affects our economy. It affects LPG prices, inflation, household expenses, all of that. So a stable Strait of Hormuz is good news for India. But I must point out to you that the minister for the government, the junior minister for petroleum in the government, has made a statement saying lower crude prices, and crude prices have come down sharply. They're less than $80 a barrel, $77 a barrel right now. He said lower crude prices does not mean lower petrol and diesel prices, because they're going to use this opportunity now to recover losses. So it's not going to mean lower prices immediately, but at least for our economy, anything worse than this would have been terrible. So that winner, and this is actually us. Point number four, US ends its blockade of Iran's ports. Again, the American forces will return to their pre-war, posture. This matters because the blockade had choked Iranian exports. Iranian oil and its economy were being strangled. So the winner here, in my opinion, is Iran, because energy analysts quoted by CNN say that Iran will increase its oil exports roughly to 2 million barrels a day. And this is for an economy that's dependent largely on oil exports. So Iran gets about half of its government's revenue from oil, and the agreement will restore the regime's economic lifeline. Point number 5, sanctions are being lifted. This is a huge one. For decades, there have been sanctions, which is America's most powerful tool against Iran. Successive American administrations, from Obama onwards, have used sanctions to isolate Iran from global banking, from global trade, and from investments. As a result, Iran has had to sell its oil really cheap and on the sly. So Washington agreeing to remove those sanctions, not immediately, not permanently, but through a process that starts now, is a huge win for Iran. Now, this might be the single largest Iranian achievement in this entire process, in this agreement. The country gains access to global markets. International companies can return to Iran. Banking restrictions will ease. Oil sales will become legal again. Iran will be able to not just move more oil, it will be able to move oil at global prices. This will mean a huge reintegration of Iran into the global economy, a massive point for Iran. Point number 6, assets that are frozen will start coming back. Now, Iran has long argued that billions of dollars, estimated $124 billion, belonging to Iran were actually trapped in foreign banks because foreign banks had frozen those assets. This agreement commits that the United States will start making those funds available. Now, analysts estimate that Iran has between $124 billion to $167 billion frozen abroad. So money that belongs to the country that's frozen in different banks, basically as sanctions, as punishment for bad behavior, that will also be made available. To understand the scale of this, roughly 1/4 of Iran's annual economic output is currently frozen. That money will become available to Iran. The winner here on this point is Iran again. For years, Tehran demanded access to these funds, and now it has obtained at least a pathway to get it back. So the timeline remains unclear, but in principle, it's been accepted, and this means a massive win in the negotiating table. Point number 7, and this is the interesting one, $300 billion in a reconstruction plan that the US and its allies will actually put as a framework. Now, what it says is basically the agreement has a commitment to create a reconstruction and investment framework of $300 billion. That is a lot of money. That is more than the frozen assets, twice as much as the frozen assets that we were talking about. The Trump administration insists that American taxpayers are not going to pay even 1 cent out of this. Not a dollar is going to come out of America. Instead, Gulf countries and other private investors can participate with America's permission to actually do this. But the scale is simply extraordinary. $300 billion is a lot of money. Iranian officials claim war damage is about $270 billion so far. I mean, so effectively what America is saying this means, and what some media houses have quoted, is that we're not paying the $300 billion as the United States of America, but if some other country wants to come and build in Iran, America will approve it. That's what that means. But nevertheless, the winner here is Iran. The country is emerging from war not only with sanctions relief, which means that foreign investors can come back in, potentially access to reconstruction capital. So it means that money will start to flow into the country. Point number 8 is no nuclear weapons for Iran. Now, this is the most important American objective. Remember, they've said repeatedly, Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. That is what America was after. It was also agreed that the highly enriched uranium will be diluted and managed under international supervision. And this was Trump's stated justification or purpose of the war. Now, the winner here seems like the United States, and I give this point to the United States, although there's a caveat here, and I'll tell you what that is. If the agreement survives, that caveat matters. Iran has already publicly stated many, many times that it does not want a nuclear weapon. It has said many, many times that its nuclear program is only for peaceful needs of energy generation and things like that. But it continued to enrich uranium. So the difficult question here is, can America, if it has gotten a commitment from Iran that it will not build a nuclear weapon, which it had those commitments even before this war, can it enforce those commitments? And that's the question. What level of inspection will be accepted? And, what will Washington legitimately do if it finds that this commitment is not being kept or being violated? So if you look at the tally right now, that's a lot of points for Iran and only 1 point for America, which means obviously this negotiating table was won by Iran. So who won? Iran won. Who lost? Benjamin Netanyahu. And let's come to Benjamin Netanyahu. This is where things get uncomfortable. Netanyahu entered the war promising a transformational change. So while America was saying we want the nuclear program to be stopped. That was their clear objective. Netanyahu had different objectives. He said, we want a weakened Iran. We want a defeated Hezbollah. We want a fundamentally altered Middle East where Iran's position in the Middle East is changed. And this was something that Saudi Arabia was also invested in because Saudi Arabia and Iran are actually competitors. But fundamentally, what has happened instead? Iran has survived. The regime has survived. Hezbollah has survived. In fact, Hezbollah has now got the protection of this agreement that the United States is invested in. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard survives. And a lot of the analysts that I spoke to said the Revolutionary Guard is, technically now even more in charge than it was when they went into the war. Because remember, when they went into the war, they were facing protests from their own citizens. Now the Revolutionary Guard has, and they are hardliners. They are, they are khattar, as we call them in India. They're extremely hard. These guys are now completely in charge. Sanctions are being lifted. Foreign assets are being unfrozen. Iran will receive funding for reconstruction. Israel is basically largely absent from those negotiations, other than being told by Trump regularly to behave. They have not been considered at all at the negotiating table. And what's even more, remarkable is the relationship that Trump and Netanyahu had when they entered this agreement seems to be falling apart. Aaron David Miller, who's a veteran Middle East advisor, told PBS that Trump appears to be willing to pressure Netanyahu if he believes that Israel threatens the deal. He's not going to allow Netanyahu to violate this deal in any way. So the biggest political loser at this point is Benjamin Netanyahu himself. The agreement leaves several of Israel's objectives unfinished, and they're actually coming out of this far worse than they had gone in. And this is 4 months before a very crucial election in Israel, and this outcome is going to be difficult for Netanyahu to defend domestically going into that election. Let's do a reality check on this deal, though. These are caveats we must remember. Before declaring Iran the full winner, the important warning is this is not the final peace treaty. They have allowed themselves a 60-day framework to actually sort out the hardest issues that remain unsolved, like uranium stockpile, its enrichment program, its Lebanon provisions, the sanctions and the pathway for those sanctions to be removed completely. Will Trump and Netanyahu be pulling in opposite directions? Will Trump, as we have seen, as a very mercurial, volatile man, change his mind at a moment's notice, decide to go in the other way? Will Netanyahu violate the agreed provisions at some point? All of these things could derail. Reuters has said that any one of these things could derail the negotiations at any point. Also, that 60-day period that they've given themselves to negotiate can be extended 60 more based on what they decide. So there are all of these caveats in place. So the war began on the 28th of February, you remember. Most analysts expected Iran to emerge isolated, economically devastated, politically weakened. Remember, Trump kept saying that there will be no Iran from the face of the earth. We will just wipe them out. Iran has survived. Its government remains in power. Its oil exports are now returning. The United States can point to commitments on weapons, but this is going to be very difficult, even for Donald Trump, to actually sell domestically as a win. I'm actually curious to see how he packages this and spins it as a win. But for India, our economy can breathe a sigh of relief, especially when we don't have our monsoons coming in on time. Our farmers need our help. We're going to have rising debt. We're going to have an economy that is under pressure because we're so desperately dependent on our monsoon. So this comes at a good time if this holds up. and there are no violations. Of course, it's not going to get passed on to us immediately, but at least we don't have to hold our breath saying what's going to happen if the ships don't come through. So the question is really whether Iran walked away with more than was expected when the bombs first started falling. And the answer is yes. Iran may not have won the war, certainly did not lose it. And from this negotiation, it is obvious that Iran was a stronger party at this negotiation. It pushed harder, it won more points. Now, for both Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, who walked into this as, strong men, testosterone driven, we're going to get this done. They didn't get it done. They messed up. And now they're going to have to justify domestically to their people as to why they did this to begin with and why they lost this much money, lost lives, lost purpose. Leave me a comment in the comment section on how you believe this played out and what your judgment is finally on who won this war.